The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character. The morning sunlight inside my new house felt almost too bright and too perfect as it spread across the floor. It bounced off the unopened boxes stacked against the wall and the single coffee cup I had left sitting on the kitchen counter. The quiet inside the house felt unusual, almost fragile, because no one had ever lived here before except me. Then I heard the slow crunch of gravel outside. The sound rolled through the stillness of the morning like a warning. I picked up my phone and opened the feed from the small door camera mounted beside the front porch. A car had pulled into the driveway. The door opened and a woman stepped out, dragging a suitcase behind her. It was my sister. Seeing her there felt strange. 12 years of silence between us vanished instantly the moment I saw the way she looked at my house. Her expression was the same confident one she always carried, like the world automatically belonged to her. She didn't pause at the gate, she didn't knock, she didn't even look unsure. She simply walked toward my front door like it had always been hers, and she had arrived exactly one day after I finished signing the papers for the house. I grew up in a home where every sound meant someone had already chosen a side. My sister never needed to ask for anything. The moment she entered a room, everyone's attention turned toward her automatically, like gravity pulling objects into place. If she sighed softly, plans would suddenly change. If she looked slightly upset, my mom would appear behind her almost instantly, hovering like a protective shadow ready to fix whatever problem existed. I learned very early that the easiest way to survive in that house was to stay quiet and unnoticed. I stayed out of the way. I handled my own responsibilities. And I tried very carefully not to make mistakes that someone else could use against me. I clearly remember the moment I truly understood my place in that family. I was 10 years old. My sister had misplaced $20 she was saving for a school event. She stood in the middle of the kitchen with her palms open, her voice shaking like she had just lost something priceless. Her eyes filled with tears. I tried explaining that I hadn't taken the money, but my mom never even looked at her. She only stared at me. The look on her face wasn't angry. It wasn't even confused. It was something worse. It was quiet disappointment, the kind that makes you feel guilty even when you've done nothing wrong. She didn't ask a single question. She didn't need proof. My sister was crying, and to my mother that was enough. That pattern stayed with us for years. The rhythm of our family never really changed. Whenever my sister made a mistake, somehow I was the one who ended up responsible. If she forgot to complete a school assignment, I stayed awake late finishing it. If she missed the school bus, it somehow became my fault for taking too long in the bathroom. Even the smallest moments were twisted. If she felt overwhelmed, everyone in the house had to whisper. If she was tired, I had to drive. If she was upset, I apologized for things I didn't even understand. By the time we reached our teenage years, my sister had mastered the art of appearing fragile. She never yelled, she never needed to. A small tear, a trembling breath, or a carefully timed pause in her voice was enough to shift every situation in her favor. My mother reacted to those signals instantly. The rest of the family followed along, and I simply stayed quiet. I focused on chores. I worked extra hours at a small local cafe, hoping that if I proved myself responsible enough, maybe the way they saw me would change. But when a household is built on unfair rules, guilt becomes something that never really leaves. It grows quietly. Over time, it spreads into everything. Eventually, that guilt becomes the only version of you that people recognize. The breaking point came on a hot summer afternoon. My sister posted a message online. It was vague but emotional. She wrote about betrayal. She described how someone she trusted deeply had hurt her. She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. Within hours, relatives began sharing the post. My phone started buzzing with calls and messages. People wanted to know what I had done. They told me I should apologize. They reminded me that family was supposed to come first. Not a single person asked what had actually happened. No one wondered if the story was even true. They simply believed her the same way they always had. That was the moment I understood something important. The story had changed. I wasn't even a real person in it anymore. I had become the villain they needed, a shadow they could blame. Someone they could point to so they wouldn't have to feel guilty. So I left. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I packed 2 suitcases and moved into a small, crowded room across the city in Austin. I thought distance might eventually fix things, but distance only froze their version of the story in place. Weeks became months, months slowly turned into years. The invitations stopped arriving, the messages stopped completely. Eventually, my mom even changed her phone number without telling me. 12 years passed like that, 12 years of quiet absence. It didn't happen suddenly. It happened slowly, like a pencil mark being erased little by little. There was never a big argument or dramatic ending. People simply stopped noticing me. I became someone who stepped out of the photograph, and nobody cared enough to adjust the camera. One day there was a family party I wasn't invited to. I only discovered it because a coworker mentioned seeing the photos online. Later that night, I looked through the pictures during my break at work. I was standing in the back of the kitchen when I saw them. The stainless steel counters reflected the bright white light from my phone. Everyone looked happy. They were wearing the same soft-colored outfits they always chose for celebrations. They looked like a complete family. In one photo, someone had written "Our Girls" under a picture of my mom and my sister. I wasn't one of those girls anymore. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time. But seeing it written so casually felt like someone had erased me with perfect lighting. Then I saw the caption that made my chest tighten. 12 years without drama. Here's to healing, healing. They spoke as if my absence had created peace, as if I had been the problem all along. They were celebrating the idea that they had survived me. I didn't react the way people expect. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't demand answers. I just stood there while the refrigerators hummed and kitchen timers beeped around me. The world stayed steady even though my chest felt tight. When my shift ended, I drove home through the quiet streets of Austin. I passed late-night diners and empty warehouses glowing under streetlights. Those places felt comforting. Nobody asked questions there. I sat in my parking space with the engine off. My hands were still covered in flour. I looked at the photos again and again. There wasn't an empty chair anywhere in the pictures, no missing name. They were simply a family that had continued forward without me. I didn't try to rewrite the story. I didn't ask for a second chance. I just took a slow breath and released the weight I had carried for years. They hadn't forgotten me. They had replaced me. I smiled quietly. The change began the same way every night. The fluorescent lights hummed above my head. The floor smelled faintly of soap. The metal tables were cold beneath my hands. The kitchen wasn't fancy. It wasn't even mine. I simply rented it during late-night hours when no one else wanted to use it. That was when the city fell quiet. Only mixers and timers filled the silence. But during those hours, I felt calm in a way I never had before. It felt better than the life I had left behind. At first, I baked small orders, just a few trays at a time. Office workers bought sweets for meetings. Delivery drivers sometimes left tips because my labels were always neat and straight. I kept careful records in a small notebook: flour costs, working hours. How many dessert bars fit onto one tray? If I made a mistake, I didn't apologize to anyone. I simply wrote it down. Numbers were honest. Numbers didn't judge me. If any of this feels familiar to you, take a second to just breathe and think about it. Stick around to see how the rest of the story unfolds. At the beginning, I didn't see it as a real business. It was just survival. It was the one small thing in my life I could control. But slowly the numbers began to change. The notebook filled with more pages. Orders arrived more often, every day. For the first time in my life, being exhausted didn't feel like punishment. It felt like progress. When a chain of local cafes contacted me, I thought it was a prank. I read the email 3 separate times under those buzzing fluorescent lights. The refrigerator hummed beside me, but the message was real. They wanted weekly deliveries from multiple locations. A real contract, reliable income, something stable. I told no one, not friends, not neighbors, and certainly not my family. Silence used to feel heavy. Now it felt like protection. The contract allowed me to improve everything. I bought better baking pans, stronger equipment. I replaced my old mixer with one that didn't sound like it might explode. Eventually, I hired a college student to help part-time. He worked quietly and carefully. He never asked personal questions. With help in the kitchen, I could finally breathe between batches. I could think again, and once I had space to think, I realized something important. I didn't need to stay in that tiny rented room anymore. I could finally buy a home. Not another temporary place with thin walls, not somewhere owned by someone else. A real house, a place where I held the only key. I found the big house almost by accident. I wasn't searching for luxury, just a little space and a kitchen big enough for serious baking. But when I saw the photos online, something caught my attention. The sunlight spilling across the wooden floors. The long, quiet hallway caught my eye. It was in a peaceful area of suburban Austin. It was way too big for just one person, but it felt right. When I walked through it for the first time, the sound of my shoes on the floor made an echo. Standing in the living room after I closed the deal, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I had earned a life where nobody else got to decide how things worked. I moved in with just one chair and a box of my recipes. The house was very quiet, but it didn't feel like I had lost anything. It felt like I finally had room to breathe. That's when I realized I needed real rules. I built them just like I built my business, one step at a time and very carefully. I made a simple, clean folder. Inside, I put all the documents, the rules for guests, a notice saying nobody could trespass, and records of every bill I had paid for them over the years. I even printed out the old messages and lies they told that made me look like the bad guy. Every page was there to remind me that they used to make up their own truth based on feelings. This time, the truth would be based on facts. I made a new rule for myself, too. Any talking would happen through email only. No more surprise visits and no more crying to get their way. If they wanted something, they had to write it down so it couldn't be twisted later. It wasn't about getting even. It was about being ready. I put that folder on the table near the front door. For 12 years, they had defined me by the fact that I wasn't there. Now, I was going to define myself. I had built a life that they couldn't break. I heard the car before I saw it. The tires made a slow, crunching sound on the gravel. I was busy working, and the morning was cold and bright. I thought it was a delivery, so I wiped my hands on a towel and looked at the camera screen. I saw a face I hadn't seen in over a decade. My sister got out of the car first. She looked totally relaxed and confident, like she was arriving at a place that was waiting for her. My mom was right behind her, struggling to pull a suitcase across the walkway. Neither of them even looked around. They acted like the house was theirs and I was just a guest. I didn't open the door right away. I just stood there listening to the heater and my own breathing. This was my space. Letting them felt like letting the past ruin everything. I opened the door just a tiny bit, enough to see them, but not enough for them to walk in. They looked surprised for a second, but then they went right back to acting like they expected to be there. "Hey," my sister said, grabbing the handle of her suitcase. "I'm moving in," since she didn't finish. I didn't say a word. I just blocked the doorway and kept the gap small. I kept my hand on the door to keep it steady. My mom stepped forward and used that same tired, bossy voice she used when I was a kid. "Don't start. Your sister needs support. We came all this way. Support." She never used that word when I was the one struggling. I let her finish talking. Then I reached back and grabbed that thin folder from the table. I held it up so they could both see it. It was organized and clear. My sister stared at it and looked confused. Then her face got hard. "You're kidding," she said. I opened the door about 2 more inches. I wasn't doing it to let them in, but just to set the folder down on the small table right next to me. I moved slowly and on purpose. I didn't feel that panicked rush I used to feel whenever I had to deal with them. "This isn't necessary," my mom said quickly, and I could hear her voice getting tight. "Family doesn't need paperwork." "You should have called us paperwork." She said it like the last 12 years hadn't been full of pain that they never bothered to admit to. I kept my voice very calm. "All communication is by email now," I told them. My sister let out a short, mean little laugh. "You're being dramatic," she said. It was the exact same way she used to talk when she was about to start crying to get her way. It was the same tone she used when her tears were just a strategy to get sympathy. But this house didn't change for her. Nothing in this quiet space moved to make her feel better. I could see their confidence starting to shake. They were finally seeing the truth. "You're really not letting us in?" my mom asked. I didn't give her an answer. I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't start listing off the 12 years I was gone or how heavy it felt to be the villain in their stories. I just stepped back, put my hand on the door, and let the silence do the talking for me. The door clicked shut. It was a soft sound, but it was final. Outside, I heard the gravel move as they shifted around. They didn't know what to do because the old version of me wasn't there for them to lean on anymore. Inside, the house stayed exactly as it was, and so did I. In the days after that, the house stayed very quiet. It wasn't a lonely kind of quiet. It felt like I had earned it. I walked through the rooms just like I always did, taking steady steps and breathing easy, but the air felt different. It felt like the walls finally knew who they were supposed to protect. I kept working. That part of my life stayed the same. The big kitchen still had that humming noise. The mixers still worked through the heavy dough, and the ovens made the windows foggy with heat. But I didn't carry that old stress with me anymore. For the first time, my work wasn't a way to run away. It was just mine. 3 weeks went by before I heard from my mom again. She didn't show up at my door or put on a big performance. She just sent an email. She asked if she could see the house one time by herself, just one afternoon with no suitcases and no assumptions. I said yes, mostly because I wanted to see what she would do if she had to follow my rules. She showed up exactly on time. She didn't look guilty, and she didn't try to act like she was in charge. She walked down the hallway very slowly. She touched the walls with her fingers like she was trying to learn something about who I was now. When she got to the kitchen, she stopped at the long counter. She looked at how the trays were stacked and how all my labels were lined up perfectly. She saw that there was no mess, which was very different from the house where we grew up. We sat at the table for a bit. She didn't talk about what happened in the past, and I didn't ask her for any apologies. The silence between us didn't feel heavy, it just felt honest. We were just two people in a room that didn't require one of us to disappear just to keep things peaceful. When she left, she stopped at the door and brushed her hand against the frame. She wasn't trying to take over the house, she was just acknowledging it. It was like she finally accepted that the power she used to have over me was gone. I heard news about my sister from other people. Someone told me she got a job, then another one, and eventually got a small promotion. The things she posted online changed too. She stopped posting mean things about me and just posted about being tired from work. For once, her life didn't revolve around me. Life didn't change all at once, it just became stable. My home slowly filled up with the sound of neighbors laughing. I had nice talks with my employees after we finished a long shift. We had small dinners at the end of the week where we all brought food. It wasn't anything big or dramatic, it was just a life I built on purpose. The folder stayed on the table by the door. I never had to touch it, but it was there as a reminder. It showed the boundary that was now in place. In the end, I didn't get my life back by seeking revenge. I got it by being clear about what I wanted. I learned that just because someone is family doesn't mean they have a right to treat you however they want. Love doesn't work without boundaries. My life didn't get bigger when they came back. It got bigger when I stopped making myself small to fit into theirs. If this story means something to you, please stay with the channel. There are a lot more truths we need to talk about quietly, one boundary at a time.